Good afternoon and welcome to the Respectability webinar for November 7th, 2018. My name is Philip Kahn-Pauley. I'm the Policy and Practices Director for Respectability, and it is my pleasure and honor to be here with you today, to be joined by James and Meg to be talking about this critical topic. I hope everyone had a good night last night, however you felt about the results. But we will not be talking about the election today. Instead, we're talking philanthropy and inclusion, and the inclusion of people with disabilities in philanthropy. I'm very excited about this topic today to talk about the philanthropic sector as, really a place where there's a workforce need, there are the talented people with disabilities out there in the world, and there's some really substantive strategies to ensure that, the people who are most directly affected by the critical issues that private foundations, funders, and foundations work on are impacted and shaped by the lived experience of people from multiple marginalized communities, from people with multiple identities, and from the millions of people with disabilities out there in our nation today. So as the topic says, advancing inclusion, careers in philanthropy for professionals with disabilities. I am joined today by James Emmett and Meg O'Connell, and I want to quickly read through their bios before turning the mic over to them. So James Emmett is one of the world's recognized leaders in disability inclusion. He has a long list of titles, a long list of successes when it comes to getting people with disabilities into the workplace. Currently the lead strategist for the Workplace Initiative of the Poses Family Foundation. He oversees strategic development and implementation of projects that are really at the cutting edge of disability inclusion. Some of his past work includes working with Walgreens, Best Buy, Office Depot, PepsiCo, and Mercy Health around some of their really transformative work at promoting disability inclusion in the workplace. He's really a superstar. He knows his stuff. He has, really a great perspective, both as a philanthropy professional, as a professional, and as somebody who's really pushed the field and moved the needle. Likewise, also joining us today is Meg O'Connell, who has worked with some of the nation's top brands across a variety of industries and has been implementing leading disability inclusion efforts for major corporations for decades. She's won numerous awards for her work. I don't have a list big enough to reflect all of those, so I'm sorry about that, Meg. But things like talent management, consumer solutions, and corporate marketing branding, all geared towards including people with disabilities in the workforce. She's also had a great impact about really changing, things like the world of high fashion, the world of the corporate philanthropy, and really, just an amazing woman, an amazing leader, and a great person to be joining us today. So, with that, I'm going to shut up for now, and I'm going to turn the floor over to our colleagues. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Philip. I appreciate it. Obviously, this is Meg O'Connell, and I'm excited to be with you guys today and talk a little bit about careers in philanthropy and people with disabilities and the opportunity that we have ahead. So, wanted to start with some level setting, as we always do in our webinars, and why this matters and this topic matters. And when we think about the population of people with disabilities, there are 56 million people in the U.S. With some type of disabling condition, and that equates to 22 million working-age Americans with disabilities. So as you look at this chart on this slide, it really tells a powerful story, and that is that people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the country, and when we think disability, we don't often think diversity. And the point of this slide is not only that we're the largest minority group in the country, but that when disability impacts an individual, it impacts everybody. It is not a white issue, a black issue, an Asian issue, an LGBTQ issue. It is an everyone's issue. So when you're talking about disability employment, you're also talking about diversity and inclusion in a broader way. So this is just a great slide. I use it a lot with my corporate clients because many times they think of visible disabilities and not the invisible disabilities that the majority of folks have. And this kind of sets the stage for them of why disability inclusion should really matter. Okay, Philip, we can go to the next slide. So as we started to prepare for this topic, we really wanted to understand kind of the breadth of the opportunities that are out there. A lot of people, when they're thinking about employment, they think about big companies, they think about nonprofits, they think about state local and federal government agencies, and philanthropy, for whatever reason, can often be the last frontier that people think about and look for in their jobs. So when we looked on LinkedIn at the end of last week and we're looking at opportunities, we saw that there are 12,000 jobs in philanthropy today that are listed on LinkedIn. So that is a huge number and opportunity that we have for folks to obtain employment when we think about careers in philanthropy. We also looked at this just as one resource, but there are several, and we have many listed at the end of this deck as well, too. So why philanthropy? We think about philanthropy as an opportunity to really dive into your passion and what is important to you in your work. It's an opportunity to take your time, your talent, and your resources and really put them into something that you truly believe in and what's impactful for you as an individual. The other piece, philanthropy has had a long and storied history of really driving change both locally and globally. Nonprofits, foundations alike have really driven a lot of the civil rights issues, human rights issues, the green initiatives, everything that you can think of that is a movement of some kind locally or globally. Chances are a philanthropist somewhere has had their hands in it and really helped drive it forward and make it happen. So when you think about those movements, it's really creating social change and helping people understand what those passions are about and how they impact our world. And so a career in philanthropy really has an opportunity to take both your profession, whatever your expertise or your function is, and marry it with your passion. And that's something that James and I have both been able to do, and it's been quite rewarding. Okay, we're ready to go to the next slide. So I wanted to share, if those of you that are on the call have any experience with disability inclusion and the benefits of hiring people with disabilities, this will not be new to you. But for those of you on the call that maybe are wondering why disability inclusion and why would foundations or philanthropy be interested in hiring people with disabilities. And we have seen these results over and over again, that people with disabilities impact in a very positive way the workforce, and that is every workforce. So some studies have been done over the last several years. Walgreens was the most notable one, the first one that did a study of employees with disabilities and compared them to employees without disabilities, and really looking at their performance, their tenure, absenteeism, safety records, and you see these numbers here. 90% perform on par or better than their non-disabled colleagues, 48% greater tenure, 40% less absenteeism. There's also a data point of 34% less safety incidences. So when you talk about all of these positive factors, the bottom line for any organization is these data points save them money. And being in a business is about making money. So these are really positive results that we have seen over and over again. And you see to the right, some of our most recognized brands are actually engaged intensively in disability inclusion in their work. So these same results and the positive impacts and benefit are not just a business benefit, they're also a benefit for philanthropy. And so foundations, philanthropy organizations are looking for ways to improve their workforce, improve their culture, and have a positive return on their investment as well as they look to invest in people and other organizations. So, Philip, I think we can go to the next slide. This is some data that we pulled from a survey that was done in 2010. It is even though it is 8 years old and we have seen other studies that provide similar data, I like this one in particularly because it highlights several key points of what managers were asked about working with an individual with a disability. And so this was a survey that was done by the National Organization on Disability and was sponsored by the Kessler Foundation and Harris Poll. So they all joined forces to find out what managers say about working with people with disabilities. The slide is most impactful when you see the blue line is the same. They're the same as everybody else. Working with people with disabilities is the same and no different. Where we have a few highlights that are actually interesting and point to the previous data that we saw on the last slide is that top line, the green line showing dedication, 35% of people with disabilities, or 35% of managers said that people with disabilities were more dedicated than their non-disabled colleagues. And if you go down to the very bottom data point of turnover, 33% less turnover. So again, continues to reinforce what we've seen and the positive impacts. And this is directly from managers that were surveyed. So it's not just performance data. This is managers' perceptions and how they work with individuals with disabilities in the workplace. So net, it's good for business. It's good for philanthropy. Philip, we can go to the next slide. So I was talking to somebody last week about a career in philanthropy. I've been really fortunate in my career. I started out in corporate America and spent, the bulk of my career in corporate America. I had an opportunity to work with the National Organization on Disability for 3 years and help them with their initiatives, and then joined the Poses Family Foundation. So I feel like I have this kind of trifecta of experience in, corporations, nonprofits, and philanthropy. So the jobs are really varied across the board, and so it's, I think, important to think about your skill sets and how you want to apply them. But, very high-level job types that we think about when we think about philanthropy are things like grants management. If you're with a foundation, chances are they're giving money, giving grants to nonprofit entities that are areas of interest to them, and so managing those grants, making sure that the grant-making strategy maps to the core beliefs of the organization. So you'll want to be a good steward of that money and making sure that the grants are being managed effectively. You build really close partnerships with your nonprofit organizations or your grantees, and so somebody that is really skilled at relationship building and relationship management is going to be really key. So people are great in this role. There's also project management, and this is for us type A's that really like a process and following a program and helping deliver on expectations and driving impact and metrics and understanding the outcomes of a project or a program. And that could be both programs internally within the philanthropic organization, or it could be externally as you manage some of those grants and seeing the outcomes of those grants as well. There are also operations functions. So for me, I am functionally a human resource professional, so that is something that translates very well into philanthropy. Anytime you have employees working anywhere, you need a human resource department, and these other functions fall into that realm as well when you think about finance, operations, accounting, all of the things that make a business run. Philanthropy is a business, but it's in the business of doing good. So all of those components will fall into play when you think about careers in philanthropy. Next slide. So this goes a little bit deeper, and there's a lot here on this slide, and I'm not going to read it all, but this is just a high-level overview, and I believe I pulled this from the Council on Foundations in talking about, getting into a little bit more detail of what are the skills and the criteria for somebody being successful in a philanthropic environment. And so, adaptability, there's lots of change and movement. We need folks that are flexible and can spin, work with organizations all the time where they shift their focus, or every 3 years they refine their focus areas and what they're going to be driving their grant-making strategies towards. So being able to see that and be adaptable to those changes is really important. Thought leadership and analysis is really important. We see this a lot in the grant-making strategy that we work, is understanding how to be a good partner and how to help drive change within the organizations that you're providing funds with. So not being, and this was something I had to learn coming from a corporate environment, you were either delivering or you weren't, and if you weren't delivering, then you moved on to the next thing. And foundations, at least the ones that I've been exposed to, tend to be a little bit kinder and gentler in that approach and really want to be a good partner in helping you design your strategy and help you understand how to make positive impact and make connections with you to other organizations that we've worked with so that you can be successful in the most positive way. We also, folks that are good at research, reading proposals, doing the nuts and bolts of really understanding how an organization can drive forward. Of course, there's legal, compliance, people that are great at communications. We have convenings and events and bringing partners together, so people that are really great at facilitation and creating we call them learning labs at the Posens Family Foundation, but creating an opportunity where you can bring folks together and really share what they're learning for greater impact across the field. So really, great opportunities across all sectors, and I think if you think about any position that you may be aware of or that you would be interested in, chances are you can find it in the world of philanthropy. Next slide. So as we talk about types of jobs, I thought that we'd give you the top 5 things you can do to start a career in philanthropy. And I think, and this was a great gateway for me, so thinking of my personal experience, was to get nonprofit experience, understand how nonprofits work, what some of their pain points are, what operationally do they need to focus on, how do they go about applying for grants and funding from other organizations, and what that looks like and what the process is and the timing and sequencing of things. That was all really impactful for me when I joined the foundation, to understand what that experience was like from the side of a nonprofit partner that was seeking money. And in fact, because I had spent so many times writing proposals that were 10, 15 pages and answering the same question in 15 different ways, when I arrived at the foundation, one of the things that I said is, we got to keep it simple and truly understand, and sometimes providing less is actually more difficult. So we instituted, rather than a 10 or 15, proposal application, we said, we want a 2-page concept paper. Tell me in 2 pages what you'll do, what the outcome is, what the budget, and what are the metrics you're going to use to really determine success of the program. So that nonprofit experience really helped influence my lens of how we could be a better partner with some of our nonprofit organizations to make things simpler and easier in their world as well. Get passionate on an issue. Again, think about things that really excite you and drive you, whether it's clean water or reducing plastic or human rights or saving the whales or whatever your issue is, chances are there's an organization out there that is focusing on that issue. So team up with them, volunteer, see if they have part-time jobs, full-time jobs, that you can jump in and get that nonprofit experience. Number 3, and we've talked a little bit about this already, is translate your skills and your experience. Think about what a nonprofit organization or foundation needs, and think about the work that you've done and how that applies. With that, I think, and this dovetails nicely into number 4, is do information interviews. We all did these early on in our careers when you're trying to find out what you want to do and who you want to be when you grow up, and it's a great thing to do as you're thinking about a career transition or a career opportunity that you are not as familiar with. It's a great time to build relationships and be flexible and think about how you can get started in this field. I say this to everyone, whether you're just starting out or you're in a career transition, you have to be flexible, and you're not going to find the perfect job right away, and sometimes you have to step into it and take a starter position, or maybe a position that in your current environment might be considered a lower level position. But if you're transitioning in your career or wanting to do something different, it's a great way to learn on the ground work and experience and skill up in your new area of focus. And number 5, consider multiple options in philanthropy. Opportunities can happen anywhere, and so we think about nonprofits, we think about big foundations, giving dollars, but there are also corporate foundations. Many big companies have a foundation side where they are doing grant making and giving back to a community, so that's a great way to translate corporate level experience into corporate foundations. There's also municipalities, government, state and local municipalities that have grant making and activities. So look around, do some research, and look for maybe not the so obvious of the big folks that you often hear about, the Rockefellers or the Ford Foundation. There are others out there as well. So it's a great opportunity to do some homework and see what is or who is in your focus area or your passion area. And next slide, and I think, James, this is when I turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Meg. I really that was a great overview. And so my name is James Emmett, and Philip gave me a great introduction. The one thing I will add to that introduction is I am a person with a physical disability. My personal story is my mom was a nurse in the Great Lakes Naval Hospital just outside Chicago during the Vietnam War, and she was exposed to a lot of different chemicals and different things coming in back then, right? They didn't know of impact. And so she was basically working in that hospital up until like literally the hour that she had me. So I was born with a birth defect and missing my left hand. So I've been a person with a visible disability my whole life. And so, again, I think that from a philanthropic standpoint, that has given me an interesting viewpoint of how to bring a perspective on folks who have different perspectives potentially, and how to bring that into a foundation, and hopefully the foundation benefit from that differing perspective. And I think, through the work of respectability and we're starting to see foundations realize whether you're working on disability issues specifically as a foundation or not, you're working on other issues, having different perspectives, just like Meg talked about corporate America, having different perspectives is really a critical thing. And I think we've even heard, right, Meg, our foundation staff, some of the folks who had been in foundations previously say, it's great to get people from different backgrounds and different perspectives, because you approach the work maybe in a different way, right? And that not only benefits corporate America, but for those of you who are on the call that just listens to Meg Grace's tips about obtaining a career in philanthropy, right? I think it's important that you embrace, your ability to bring a different perspective into those funders, and if you're willing and if you're comfortable with that, upplay that as you talk to potential different foundations about how you can bring that different perspective. So thank you, Meg, for that overview. One of the things that we wanted to do on the back end of this webinar was give you an example of okay, so now you've obtained your dream job in philanthropy. We wanted to give you an example of Meg and my journey of how we helped transform a foundation, and we're able to, given by our trustees, Fred and Nancy Postis at the Postis Family Foundation, given the trust to build an initiative. So we wanted to kind of just give you the perspective of how we built that, what we were thinking when we built that, what is potential future work for whether it's for our foundation or for other foundations. And we'll talk this in terms of specifically in disability employment strategy. But again, as Meg said, hopefully, you'll find relevance to how to build a strategy within a foundation. The other thing I think that Meg is so critical, was such a critical point, is there are so many great foundations out there, the Rockefeller, the Ford, all the ones that are so big and do so much good work. But on the same token, there are so many corporate foundations and family foundations that are growing and looking for good staff and good ideas. And so I'm hoping that if you are considering a career in philanthropy, you're not only looking at those really big foundations, you're doing your due diligence within your state. You're doing your due diligence within your city, within the companies within your city, to see where the foundations exist and where there may be opportunity. Because I'll tell you, and Meg, I think you would agree with this, right, is the Postis Family Foundation had resources, but it also gave Meg and I an opportunity to build an initiative, which was incredible. But I think there are other foundations that this possibility exists too. So as we think about it, we just wanted to kind of, as I said, walk you through how we built a strategy. And so Meg and I joined the Postis Family Foundation in late 2012, early 2013. And at that time, the Postis Family Foundation, and if you go to, are the two main websites that describe the work of the foundation are understood.org, which is a website for parents of kids with learning and attention issues, and the workplace side of it is workplaceinitiative.org. I think they're on the resources at the end. But those two websites, understood.org and workplaceinitiative.org, describe some of the work that has resulted from this journey. But back in 2012, when we joined the Postis Family Foundation, the foundation was mainly a check writing foundation, right? They were doing some great work, but a lot of it was related to what we would say strategic philanthropy, right? And so at that time, they were making the choice to convert to more of a strategic philanthropic organization where, yes, they're going to provide grants, but they were also going to provide technical assistance and strategy around their work in the issues they cared about. And one of those was disability employment, right? So as we look at this first slide, as we began our journey on building a strategy in late 2012, early 2013, this was the status of the world of disability employment, of the area that we cared about. And we were seeing where there was companies that still had fairly low or pretty low demand for workers with disabilities. There was the Walgreens example, and Lowe's and Best Buy and a few other great companies doing work to strategically hire people with disabilities. But the bottom line was there were very few companies really, in essence, having that demand, who had created that demand for workers with disabilities. So we faced that. We also faced from a nonprofit side, right? We, in 2012, of a variety of different community providers, not everyone, right? There's some really good ones out there, but a lot of community providers and community organizations who really treated disability employment like a one-off situation, right? Where they were just helping one or two people with disabilities get jobs here or there, but there was no strategy. There was no communication with business partners. There was no business language being used. So we faced low demand from companies. We faced not a lot of business knowledge on the supply side of workers with disabilities. And then we found that funders, in terms of other foundations funding work in disability employment, there was a very limited number of folks. There was, the Chicago Community Trust is doing some great work. Our good friend Elaine Katz at Kessler Foundation, who's really a pioneer in disability employment funding, was doing some good work. And there were a few other foundations doing that. But the bottom line is, there were, and there still are today, right? But Respectability is working on that, of foundations who are doing work in disability employment. But we saw that state back in 2012. And so we asked ourselves, how do we build a framework that we could create not just a few jobs, but create thousands of jobs and create thousands of opportunities for workers with disabilities. And we really felt we had to address those three areas of the low company demand, the lack of knowledge on the provider side, and the lack of interest, for lack of a better term, the lack of interest on the funder side. And so we created a strategy, a three-pronged strategy that you'll see on this slide on the bottom right of this slide, where we said we are going to go national, local, and field building. And so we said one of the things we have to do is work on that demand issue, right? We have to start grooming companies, figuring out other companies besides the very few handful of companies that were doing disability inclusion, and see if we can drive demand, build the business case. And we were able to do that with great partners. So companies like UPS joined us on this journey. Companies like Pepsi, like Amazon, have joined us as some of those national companies that have been a partner with us in building strategic intention around disability inclusion. So we had that national side of our strategy. The next thing we do, and Meg says this a lot, and it's really well taken, right, is even if you partner with national companies, all hiring is local, right? And so we needed to build the local capacity and work on projects that would demonstrate the importance of local collaboration. We saw that. And to that end, then getting to those service providers, right? We said our second problem is we have service providers who don't speak business. So let's build some local efforts. And what we did was build a set of what we called at the time clusters in different communities like Louisville, Kentucky, like St. Louis, Missouri, where we built on to the success that organizations have collaborating and really tried to build local efficiencies so they could better work with the companies, again, all in the vision of decreasing the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. And then lastly, we said, okay, so if we're working nationally and we're working locally, part of the thing we want to do is share our learnings. Part of the thing we want to do is continue to help the field, whether it's companies or nonprofit organizations, understand what we understand. So we began the journey, especially towards the end of this period between 2012 and 2017, of presenting at conferences, doing webinars like this. For those of you on the call who are looking at careers in philanthropy, this was an opportunity, an amazing opportunity for Meg and I and our team, Judith Smith and other folks who joined us on this journey, along with our past president, Shelley London, who joined us on this journey of, we were empowered by our trustees. We were empowered by Fred and Nancy Posas to build this strategy that could have impact. And so that's how we began. If we go to the next slide, Philip, we'll talk a little bit more about the intermediate, the journey, and then we'll talk about the end of the journey. So I talked about this three-pronged strategy that we created in beginning of 2013. And so we began to operationalize, right? And as we thought about, again, the ultimate goal is creating more employment opportunities for people with disabilities, we again said on a national level, we have to find brand name partners. We have to find companies who will engage. And so you'll see great companies like Cintas, like Procter & Gamble, like Amazon, like Pepsi, who joined us in that journey. And as a funder, we couldn't fund, right? We couldn't give Pepsi money or Amazon money to build their initiative. But what we could do was we could find what we called intermediaries or community partners who we could give money to, who are nonprofit, who then could in turn support those companies. So we chose, for example, Ability Beyond, which is located in Connecticut, that already had a strong partnership with Pepsi, and we provided grants and technical assistance to Ability Beyond to help Pepsi build their national disability strategy. Or we chose Northwest Center for Amazon, or an organization in Indianapolis that actually I'm sitting at right now called Tangram that worked with Sears, or a great organization in Ohio called ViaQuest that ultimately supported Cintas in their efforts. We also worked with the United States Business Leadership Network, which is now Disability In, and help them build a cohort of companies, 20 big brand companies that are currently working together on disability inclusion. So we were always asking the question, how do we initially catalyze this field? How do we, and always going back to those three prongs, how do we work on a national level, a local level, and a field building level to catalyze this field? So we found those national partners, as the slide talks about. We then looked locally, as I was saying. We looked at communities where good work was already going on and seeing if our funding and our technical assistance could help those communities build even more aggressive models to more efficiently get people with disabilities through the system and into jobs, into career-oriented jobs. And so we found places, like we said, like Columbus, Ohio, where we still have a project today in partnership with a couple of local organizations and their vocational rehabilitation department, which has been a fantastic partner. We worked with an organization called Options in Louisville, Kentucky, that already had a coalition of service providers with them, but we helped them build up their strength and partnership with Louisville-based companies. So we built local models, and then, like we said, we went out and talked about it. We went to conferences. And the other really exciting thing that happened that was unintended, I shouldn't say unintended, but it was not one part of one of our bigger goals, is we had other foundations join this journey with us. So not only were Meg and I able to help kind of be able to craft the disability employment strategy of one funder, now we had other partners who were joining our co-funding projects with us, and so the list is pretty long, but other funders like Autism Speaks, like the Kessler Foundation, like the May and Stanley Smith Charitable Trust out in San Francisco, like ICD in New York, like Next for Autism, a variety of other funders, folks that had provided dollars, now came together in what we loosely kind of informally called the Funder Collaborative, so we could all multiply our resources, right? So now we have a national strategy, a local strategy. Now we're educating the field, but we're also getting other dollars behind us. And not only did we get some potential match dollars from these great funders who partnered with us, we also worked at the local level to get state dollars and other workforce development dollars to help build our project. So again, we wanted to amplify the work that we were doing, and I would say that as you think about a career in philanthropy, one of the things I've learned in a hardcore lesson is once you start going out and doing good work, find other funders. But again, it could be small funders, it could be bigger funders, but find other funders who share your passion. We have 10 foundations now who share our passion and who have helped us in one way or another, who have joined the journey, and it's so exciting. And that just has a multiplicity effect on our program. So as you think about it, again, you as an individual with a disability seeking a career in philanthropy, not only can you have impact in your potential organization or your potential foundation. But as you start your journey, hopefully bringing other foundations in collaboration along the way. And that's one of the things we learned as well. Philip, if you could go to the next slide. So, and this next slide is a little bit of a roadmap of just kind of how we looked at it, and again, how we thought about disability employment the unemployment as the key problem, and how we were and are going to continue to address it. And so, as you see, we kind of built 3 stages in our initiative from 2013 to 2017, that 5-year span, in thinking about, first building a foundation, getting out and establishing what we want to do as a funder, as a foundation. Then we funded projects, and we not only funded projects, but as Meg said, Meg comes from a corporate background. I come from a background, before I worked with companies, I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor by trade. So I came from that VR background, and so we were trying to build, from a philanthropic standpoint. We were getting diverse opinions, and so not only did we as a foundation provide grants, we also provide technical assistance to our projects from myself, from Meg, from other consultants we brought on who could help the projects from a strategic standpoint build. So we did that. So we set that foundation. We started, and then the next period of time, as you see, the next kind of is we wanted to learn and thrive, right? We wanted to understand that the projects we were funding and supporting, what's working, what's not, what can we include in the models moving forward, And I will say that we've had the Postus Family Foundation, we've had some wonderfully successful programs, and we've had some failures, right? And some things that we didn't meet the outcomes, didn't meet objectives. But I would say every one of those initiatives helped us move forward, because we learned from the successes, but we also learned from the barriers and the failures. And that's one of the other things I guess being new to a foundation, and I don't know, Meg, if you felt this way, I felt almost, okay, now I'm able to give out money to organizations and have this impact. And I almost felt this internal pressure on myself that every single project be uber successful. Otherwise, I'm wasting time of everybody, wasting time and resources, right? And that's one of the lessons I've learned as an individual in philanthropy is not everything's going to be successful. Even if it's resourced well, there's a lot of barriers to whatever the projects may be, but especially in the field of disability employment. And so that's one of the things I would say as a professional is if you move forward there, if you're in philanthropy, is right, learning from your successes, but also learning from the failures, and let the failures help drive your lessons and the strategy moving forward. And that's what we did in phase 2. Is we learned and we thrived, right? And then now we're into and we hit what we call the deliver and scale. So now we want to scale the efforts, right? After we built the foundation, we learned, we thrived, and now we're scaling, and that's where we're at right now. That's where we kind of concluded our first phase. Is now we're scaling, right? We've gone from catalyzing this field that we care about to looking at projects that are really going to scale, right? And so as we think about the next steps, that's really the key word for not just the Postus Family Foundation, but for all the, if there are other funders on the call, is how do we start thinking about scale and in this area in disability employment. Philip, if we could go to the next slide. And so we wanted to kind of give you that perspective of the journey, right? This is, now that we've gone through that 5-year period from the beginning of 2013 to the end of 2017, we have learned a ton as professionals with disabilities in philanthropy. We accomplished, I believe the number was, when we first wanted to measure ourselves and set up outcomes for our initiative within the Postus Family Foundation, we set the goal of, we hope to have impact and create 7,500 opportunities, 7,500 jobs for people with disabilities. I believe through our projects, the number as of the end of 2017 was close to 2013, and I think we're now up to over 16,000 jobs created. Is that right, Meg, or is it even more now?
Yep. Yeah, it's a little over. We're inching up to 17,000. Yep.
Okay. So we're close to 17,000 jobs that we can directly relate to projects we've either funded and or provided technical assistance on, right? And when we first set that number, for the folks on the webinar, when we first set that number back in early 2013 of we want to create 7,500 jobs by the end of 2017, I almost resigned right there, right? Because I'm thinking to myself, how could we really get to that number, right? It was a goal. Our trustees believed in our ability to get there. Our president believed to get there. But I was thinking, boy, that we've got to really be smart about our projects and help really think about how we're going to do this, along with not just reaching this goal, but learning all the lessons along the way that again can catalyze the field. And so there were times in the journey where we were concerned about that objective. We were concerned about the momentum we were creating, and we just continue to, again, learn those lessons. And again, one of the other lessons I would then impart to professionals with disabilities who want to be a part of philanthropy is, set those stretch goals. Set those stretch goals for yourself. Set those stretch goals for your program, for your foundation. We really didn't think it would be achievable, and we more than achieved that goal by continuing to stretch our thinking, again, in this area we care about as we move forward. And again, I would say, and Meg, I'll let you comment here, my perspective that I brought to the foundation as an individual with a disability, but also as a person who had been in the disability world for a long time, had a fairly unique impact on the way this foundation thought about any issue, but specific to disability inclusion. I don't know, Meg, any comments there on how you felt in terms of what you brought to the table from your background?
No, I think nothing new than what I had already said, that I think it's just, coming at it with a little bit of a different mindset and approach. And I talked a little bit about having to be a little bit kinder, gentler in my approach, because the corporate environment and culture is very different when you talk about project execution and delivery, and I had to really shift my mindset about the bigger picture and what we were after and what we were really trying to learn, and that's part of the being able to adapt to new environments and different approaches. And so for me, I think that was one of the biggest learnings that I have, and I feel really fortunate to have had the experience, because I think it's made me better in my analytical thinking in general, and thinking about things in a broader picture. So it's really been rewarding.
So thank you, Meg. On this slide, this is now today, right? From our work in the Postage Family Foundation in the Workplace Initiative, this is some of the action items that we want to, not just us anymore, right, but the field of disability inclusion to think about to improve even bigger scale. And there at the bottom are some of the things that we even need to learn more about. So when you look at some of the action items, we really believe for the field of disability employment, it's important to continue to work on transformation of HR practices, right? We know sometimes that unintentionally, right, a lot of the HR practices, especially with the introduction of AI to the human resource process, a lot of people with disabilities are getting locked out of the system. So we have to address that. We have to address that with corporate America. We have to address that with companies across the country. We want to establish model companies, right? We think it's more important, and I think Jennifer and Philip and the team at Respectability do a great job of this, of really sharing the folks that are doing it well, right? And we want Microsoft and Walgreens and Pepsi and those companies who are doing it well to tell the world, to serve as model companies, so that other companies who are in the space of, I'm not even sure I want to do disability inclusion, really see those brand models coming up there. So we want to continue to support those model companies. We think it's important that we continue to build on the current local work and continue to identify local work, because, as we said, at the end of the day, if you're in a national foundation, you're in a global foundation, working on national and global initiatives is critical. But when you think about hiring and you think about impact, at the end of the day, it's that job seeker with a disability and their supervisor in Evansville, Indiana, that really make the difference, or wherever that really make the difference. So building on the current local work, we think it's really important for especially job seekers with disabilities to continue to be aware of and improve their own technology in terms of the job search, and being able to use technology as part of their job search and job supports. We have a thing, if you go to workplaceinitiative.org, if you go to that website, you will see we have a tool called the Do It Yourself Guide, and that is an initial guide on how to help companies begin the initial steps of having strategic work around disability inclusion. Moving forward, we'd like to build that out into more of an online resource, not just a guide, quote unquote, but more of an online portal where companies can come in and get customized support. We also think this concept of cohorts, right? The examples that I gave, going for the gold, through Disability In, which is now actually called Inclusion Works, Advice, which is a project of Autism Speaks and Next for Autism. Those are a couple examples of what we call company cohorts, companies working together to expand the field. So that is a piece of that. And then when we think about our learning agenda, we think about learning more about the pipeline of job seekers with disabilities, which is going to be critical to scale, and making sure we're getting to those 22 million Americans, whether they're in the system or not. And we're also thinking, and we're continuing to learn more about that, and continuing to learn more about how we can mobilize the quote-unquote disability system to support workers. So that's some of the pieces that we're going forward. And hopefully, again, that gives you an example of some of the work of our journey, right? As professionals in philanthropy, as professionals with disability experience and who have disabilities, we have been able to impact our funder, our foundation, and we believe, as Meg said, there's so much opportunity. And again, we understand that disclosure and how you talk about your own disability. Again, if you are a job seeker looking at a career in philanthropy, we understand how you talk about your disability and how you disclose is a personal decision. But what I can tell you, at least from a person with a visible disability, is upplaying that nowadays. And letting foundations understand the uniqueness of your view as a person with a disability and how you bring strength to the workplace is a really important thing to consider. So on this last slide, and we have a couple more slides that just talk about resources. And so, Philip, I know we want to open it up to questions and answers. Do we want to highlight these last couple of resources, or do we want to do that as we open it up to Q&A?
I'm going to buzz through the last couple slides, and then I have a bunch of questions, and we'll invite the audience to ask any questions they want. But James and Meg hinted at it a little bit, but it's been really interesting to see the field of philanthropy beginning to really grapple with disability as part and parcel of the work they do, the work that they need to do. But it's a journey, and I want to take a step back 2 years ago when the Ford Foundation announced a multi-billion-dollar initiative around, get this, caste, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. They did not mention disability as one of the categories of marginalized communities that they wanted to impact. Not only did they put out a video about this great new multi-billion-dollar initiative without any captioning, meaning that people who are deaf could not understand what was being said. Likewise, all of the video and all of the image materials that were put out as part of this whole rollout had no alternative text, meaning that people who are blind could not actually read or understand what was being done. Likewise, at the time, the Ford website was not fully accessible, meaning that if you used a screen reader or had some vision issue, you couldn't actually go out and find out what the Ford Foundation was doing to transform the world of philanthropy. And Respectability has worked with the Ford Foundation. We've worked with other disability leaders to really open their eyes to the fact that they were, intentionally or unintentionally excluding the 1 in 5 Americans who have a disability, meaning millions and billions of people in the world, couldn't be part of, this transformative work to really impact marginalized communities, yet every marginalized community in the world has people with disabilities living in it. But Ford has really changed, and it's really a model for what Respectability wants to see happen in the world of philanthropy. There's a really powerful leader there by the name of Noreen Khan. She has really been a mover and a shaker and a partner of ours. And on the slide, you have a bunch of, I have a quote from her, as well as slides that talk in detail about what Ford has been doing. I highly encourage anyone who is connected to philanthropy to read Darren Walker's letter on Ford's journey to embrace disability. Likewise, I bring up J.P. Morgan as being another group where they've really started to lean in, and what they've done is they've actually been financing major civil rights conferences to provide accommodations, to provide resources, to ensure that there's ASL interpreters, to ensure that there's captioning, to ensure that people with disabilities from multiple marginalized identities can participate and bring their perspectives and their voice to these conversations, which are so important. Likewise, the MacArthur Foundation, another of the big names that are out there, they have been really making a very forward-leaning to start adding disability to part and parcel of the work that they do. And they held a big contest not that long ago, and they really are, embracing this. And you know what? These are the big fish in the pond, and as the big fish move, the smaller fish are going to move too. If you're particularly interested in the kind of the job hunt piece, Respectability, the Council on Foundation, LinkedIn, all have websites. We have resources to help you with a job hunt specifically related to nonprofit jobs. There's things like the Job Accommodation Network, which can give you advice in terms of accommodations. Noreen Khan from Ford actually runs a job list in philanthropy, which is pretty exciting. Likewise, the Council, Chronicle Philanthropy also has a job board. There's other resources that are out there that can give you a sense of, where the work is being done, and where the work is being done, they need people, and we want to see people with disabilities part and parcel of that. And the last slide here before I turn it over to questions is kind of a rundown of organizations that support inclusion and diversity in philanthropy writ large, and they are, are now or are going to become Respectability's partners in really advancing this work forward. So if there's any, issue in particular, whether it says, education, climate change, what have you, there's an organization out there that is doing good work in the philanthropic space, and a good organization that needs talented employees with disabilities to bring their voice to the table. So there's two ways that our audience can ask a question. Either you can type it into the chat box on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and operator, could you explain how folks can ask a phone question?
Participants who have called in on the telephone to listen are welcome to indicate they'd like to ask a question by pressing 7# on their telephone keypad. That's 7 followed by the pound sign on your telephone keypad to indicate you would like to speak. Just listen for your name to be announced, and we will unmute your line. All participants can submit questions using the Q&A box. Type your message at the bottom of the Q&A box and click on the Ask button to send it.
Thank you. So I have just kind of a quick question that comes up, and this comes out of the world of kind of corporate inclusion, but I think that it's an important thing to think about. So James or Meg, do either one of you want to define what an ERG is? That is an employee resource group?
Sure, I can take that. Employee resource groups are organizations, or sometimes they're called affinity groups or business resource groups, of like-minded people and their allies within companies that support one another. So an employee resource group, an example, many of them started with working mothers. There are veterans employee resource groups, Asian Americans, African Americans, and now what has been emerging over the last 10 years is organizations having disability employee resource groups. Each one can be a little bit different, but the ones that are run really well are ones that align to the needs of the business and also serve as advisors to the organization, ensuring that they're helping with things like accessibility, answering questions around what the job, what the hiring experience is like, the application process is like within an organization. So they can be really powerful within a company and not just a lunch and learn type activity, though they do have those, but the ones that are really driving change are the ones that are really impacting the business and influencing where they go next.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Meg. So kind of a related question, and something I don't think, it's something that comes up in kind of the, whether we're talking about the private sector or the public sector, but I haven't heard any kind of discussion around in the philanthropic sector, is I was wondering, could either of you talk about what is a self-identification campaign and how that might be one of the many tools in the toolbox of promoting disability inclusion in philanthropy?
Yeah, James, since you kind of touched on this already, do you want to start, and then I can add if I feel you've missed anything?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think more and more, right, we're seeing companies utilize what's called self-identification campaigns. In other words, getting out to their workforce and messaging around why that somebody with a disability should disclose within that setting. And I think what in terms of Philip, in terms of foundation, I think being able to utilize messaging, whether it's through small videos, it's through communications of partnerships, it's through lunch and learns, it's through communication to the staff in different ways, but that communication focusing on how the foundation values people with disabilities and basically, like it says, encouraging people to disclose their disability, encouraging people, leaders, individuals to step out and say, I have a learning disability, or I have autism, or I have a mental health condition, and allowing people to bring their whole self to work, right? Because so often, especially folks with hidden disabilities, choose not to disclose, and every decision is a personal decision, but many folks choose not to disclose, right, because of fear of being stigmatized. If that company or if that foundation can bring to light the value that they place on people with disabilities internally through that strategic messaging, then we can get more people, not just helping the foundation hire people, more staff with disabilities, but knowing that you already have staff with disabilities on your team. But if you message this in a self-ID campaign in a strategic way, you can get those folks to come forward and talk more about their disability and their perspective in a more honest light.
Wonderful. Thank you. Operator,
that's great.
Meg, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was only going to add a small thing. I'm actually a person with an invisible disability. I have epilepsy, and I have always disclosed. For me, it was a matter of safety disclosing, but there was and still is that period of time that you kind of feel out your coworker. So if you're on the fence about to disclose or not disclose, start with your most trusted advisors at work or your friends at work that you feel are going to be okay with disclosure. The other thing that I would say, and I actually did a presentation at an event, and we did a scenario of what to do and what not to do when someone discloses a disability to you. And for me, I feel like I'd be able to retire if I had $1 for every time someone told me that their dog or their cat had epilepsy, and that's someone's response. And at first I was like, God, that's a really interesting way to respond to someone disclosing. And then I thought about it like they're trying to relate and understand in whatever format that brings, and it's not about me or about them. It's them trying to understand and process the information. So don't be shocked or surprised if somebody says something that seems a little off. I mean, if we've got people with disabilities on the phone call, likely something like this has happened to you in your lifetime where people have said things that put you off a little bit, and I think it's just remembering that, for the most part, people don't mean any harm. They're just trying to process and relate and figure things out. So start with a trusted friend or coworker or somebody and practice with them if you're nervous about disclosing. And as James said, it's always a personal decision. James and I both know people that still to this day say, I will never, ever, ever disclose, and completely respect that. So whatever you're most comfortable with, do what's right for you, but just a couple of tips if you decide you want to disclose.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you so much, James. We are out of time for today, but I just want to quickly say that, a phrase that you always hear when it comes to conversations about disability is that nothing about us without us. And when it comes to the impact that philanthropy has in our nation today, we really are at the point where we need to be a matter of nothing about us without us. I saw a report from the Chronicle on Philanthropy that last year was quite literally, and this may sound very presidential, the biggest ever year in terms of giving, in terms of fundraising in America today. And as more and more people with disabilities think about and look at philanthropy as a career, as a way to have an impact, to give back, and to really take a place of leadership. James and Meg, you are part and parcel of what we want to see. You are a vision of what can be done. You are at the forefront of this work. We're delighted to have had you with us today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. For our audience, there will be copies of the PowerPoint distributed to everybody who registered. Video and audio recording will be posted on our website in a couple of business days. Thank you for joining us, and that concludes today's webinar.